Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of Audiobookish. I'm here with Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we're going to be covering one of Poppy's favourite audiobooks, His Dark Materials. Poppy, would you like to tell the good folks about His Dark Materials?
Oh, I definitely would. Super excited about this. So here's kind of the summary. Brought to you by Penguin, featuring an exclusive bonus interview between the author Philip Pullman and His Dark Materials star Ruth Wilson, now a major BBC series. Without this child, we shall all die. Lyra Balakwa lives half wild and carefree among the scholars of Jordan College, with her demon Pantalaimon always by her side. But the arrival of her fearsome uncle, Lord Asriel, draws her to the heart of a terrible struggle, a struggle born of stolen children, witch clans, and armoured bears. As she hurtles towards danger in the cold far north, Lyra never suspects the shocking truth. She alone is destined to win, or to lose, the biggest battle imaginable. Read by Philip Pullman and a full cast of narrators.
And just a quick bio on Philip Pullman. Philip Pullman was born in Norwich and educated in England, Zimbabwe, Australia and Wales. He studied English at Exeter College in Oxford. His first children's book, Count Karlstein, was published in 1982. To date, he has published 33 books read by children and adults alike. His most famous work is the His Dark Materials Trilogy. These books have been honoured by several prizes, including the Carnegie Medal, the Guardian Children's Book Prize, and for the Amber Spyglass, the Whitbread Book of the Year Award, the first time that prize has been given to a children's book. Pullman has received numerous other awards, including the Eleanor Fargione Award and the Astrid Lindgren Award. He was knighted in 2019 New Year's Honour List for services to literature. I'd first like to start off by thanking Penguin Random House Audio for granting us access to these review copies of the audiobooks. So these are new releases. So the Northern Lights His Dark Materials audiobook contains an interview between Philip Pullman and Ruth Wilson, who plays Mrs. Coulter in the BBC TV series. So because this is one of your favourite books, I just thought, how excited were you by kind of being granted review copies?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. So we were fortunate enough to, be talking to Penguin about us reviewing some stuff. And yeah, one of the things that they mentioned was this His Dark Materials trilogy. And so immediately jumped on it. As I mentioned in the last episode, I'd already started re-listening to Northern Lights anyway. It's the kind of thing where I knew that this re-release was coming out. So they're not new audiobooks. They are the same audiobooks that were published ages ago and that I listened to as a child, but they have been re-released, and especially, like you say, Northern Lights, the first book, has been re-released with this exciting over an hour long interview between Philip and Ruth Wilson. And it's the kind of thing where I really wanted to listen to that interview. But equally, obviously, we paid for all 3 books at the time. And it was kind of is an hour-long interview worth me buying them again? And then, yeah, to basically have, you can listen to it anyway was just incredible. Because yes, I think anyone that doesn't already own the audiobooks, they are 1,000 zillion quadrillion percent worth buying. The only reason I hesitated not buying these new releases was because, well, I have 95% of the hours of content already. So yes, and I mean, I should clarify, you don't have to buy all 3 to get the interview, but I think once you've listened to the first one, you're going to want to listen to all of them. Yeah. So yeah, if those of you who don't know, the trilogy begins with Northern Lights, then you have The Subtle Knife, and then The Amber Spyglass is the third in the trilogy.
So I really appreciated the interview at the end because it gave a lot of context to different things that happened within the series. So yeah. my personal experience of these books, I didn't listen to the audiobooks like Poppy. I read the books ages ago. It must have been like more than over a decade ago. So I kind of sort of knew the things that happened in the book, but there's so much that I'd forgotten. And
yeah, I mean, even I'd forgotten.
Yeah, it was just kind of, I couldn't believe how many things that I'd misremembered.
Yes, actually, on the subject of misremembering, I want to quickly get my embarrassment out of the way first, because I have a correction to make. Because in our first ever episode back in series 1, when we spoke about our kind of top 5, and this was obviously in my top 5, I mentioned that both the actors for Will and Lyra changed at some point throughout the series, and I now believe I am wrong. The actor for Will certainly changes between books 2 and 3, and it is a bit jarring. Though, to be fair, the second actor does a really good job of having the same sort of rhythms as the original voice. I think if he'd been intended to be a couple years older in the book after, then it would have been perfect casting. But yeah, obviously when you're listening to it and it's meant to carry straight on, it does feel a bit weird until you get used to it. But I'd misremembered that Lyra also changed. I was convinced that Lyra also changed, so I'm sorry for feeding our listeners wrong info, but I do believe she's actually the same one. But yes, I'd remembered part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, see, so I completely understand why you would think that, because I think her performance gets much better in the second 2 books.
Okay.
I think there's like a marked improvement. So I'm kind of just wondering if she just got more used to playing that character, or
maybe
there was a change in the direction we received. Let's try and organize it a little bit. So let's start off with Northern Lights. So Northern Lights, or the Golden Compass, as I think it might be known in the United States.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's set in a parallel world, which is quite similar to ours, but I'd say it's a little bit more, I want to say it feels like a more Victorian-esque time, kind of
That's
a little bit more steampunky to me, especially considering some of the, use of some of the technology in there. And we start off with Lyra hiding in a cupboard. We instantly get a feeling of what this character's all about, the sort of child that sneaks into places where they really ought not to be. I was just wondering how the opening few, I don't know, paragraphs is the wrong word, but the opening few minutes, how that kind of like grabbed you and got you into the story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's sort of a bit weird thinking about the fact that obviously I knew that happens with this being a bit like you so long ago when I first got into them. I can't kind of say it in the sense of, someone who comes completely fresh to it. I did kind of know that's how it started and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it does really good. I mean, Philip talks in the interview at the end about how having Pantalaimon, the demon, is kind of like, for those who don't know, it's like a part of yourself that manifests in like an animal form and is kind of a lifelong companion. And having Lyra be able to talk to Pantalaimon all that time is a way of getting the story across, getting across what she's doing, any kind of internal conflict of, oh, should she be here, should she not, kind of tensiony stuff. You get some dialogue in there when, in a sense, it's just one character in the plays, which is really cool. And then, yeah, you're getting all this intrigue from really quite early on, and danger and stuff that continues throughout, I mean, all 3 books, but shifts in interesting ways.
Yes, I think the thing that really grabbed me about what Philip Pullman said in the interview was that he really enjoys reading spy thrillers. And when he said that kind of immediately clicked something in my head, because to me, this very much does read like a spy thriller. She's, Lyra, and, all the characters in the book are trying to get information off of each other. They're trying to say, oh, what does this person know? How can I leverage this information that I have about this thing against that other person? So it very does much feel like I don't want to say like a James Bond, because that's kind of the wrong comparison. I'm thinking maybe more of some of the Michael Caine spy movies. It's kind of very much that sort of thing flowing through it.
Fair, yeah. And certainly like him saying that he was reading a lot of thrillery stuff, the kind of idea of tension building and stuff like that, he does exceptionally well. And in a way that, so this, is marketed as a children's book, but as so many people will tell you, it's enjoyed by people of all ages. But I think this sort of idea with, how scary and how tense can you make something that is marketed to be read by children, I think he does a really amazing job of having that genuine tension that is suitable for everyone and effective for everyone. It's not in any way dumbed down that, oh, maybe children will find that a bit tense, but we're not going to find that tense, or anything like that. It's a really, just that art of storytelling and making you gripped and stuff that, you get in thrillers and things, and that he's done really well in this.
I think he definitely knows how to. There were a few bits where I actually, even though I know how the stories end, there was a few bits where okay, this is it's getting a bit much for me now. Let me just take a little bit of a
Yeah.
break and come back.
Yeah, I think it's also quite important to say I don't know what speed you listen to it at,
Yeah.
but I think the pacing that Pullman has as a narrator is brilliant and really does lend to how he's written the book. I think it is quite a lot. We were determined to listen to all three of these before we recorded this episode. So even with my head start, it was quite a lot to get through. And I did consider kind of turning it up a little bit. But even when I just turned it up to like 1.1, it just wasn't quite right for me because his pacing is just so perfect when he's speaking.
Yeah, so I listened to the first two books pretty much at normal speed. The third book, I didn't have a choice. I had to kind of the time. So the first two books I think are, well, I'm looking at it now. So this is around 10 hours for Northern Lights, around 9 hours for Subtle Knife, and then the Amber Spyglass is an absolute monster. I think it comes over at 15 hours or something. So I didn't have time. I didn't have time to kind of like to get through it before the weekend. Yeah, it is kind of like that pace and the way, not only the way that he narrates, but kind of the way the vocal performances here are just absolutely magnificent. So I kind of get why you fell in love with these audiobooks when you was younger. For me, Joanna Wyatt as Lyra is fantastic. But I think the two standout performers for me are Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel. Kind of whenever those two are performing, it just draws you in so much. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the voice of Mrs. Coulter. I really do. And I think she has that thing that you get in the beginning of the book. You're told that she is captivating, that no one can escape her. She's, the Pied Piper of these children, and no one can escape her charm and things like that, and her elegance. And I really do think that comes across in the voice. I don't think we'll talk about it too much because obviously we're mostly reviewing this audiobook, but we can't ignore the BBC series going on at the moment.
I've not watched it. I've not seen any of it.
That's all right. That's okay. Well, that makes it easier for us to not get bogged down in that too much. Yeah. But I imagine that, if a lot of people come across this, they haven't read the books maybe, but they might have watched the TV show and be thinking about, well, I want to read the books. Why not listen to the books? But what I'm wanting to say is that the voice of Mrs. Coulter in this is a lot more like from the film version, so of The Golden Compass with Nicole Kidman. It's a lot more like that, the feminine, elegant voice that I think is taken a different way with Ruth Wilson. I really do like Ruth Wilson's performance, but I do see her Mrs. Coulter as a different Mrs. Coulter to my Mrs. Coulter from the books. I think my Mrs. Coulter from the books is a lot closer, and partly because of this voice, a lot closer to kind of Nicole Kidman, Mrs. Coulter. And yeah, I think that's an interesting distinction and something to be aware of if you are coming to this from the TV show, is that, she is different to that. But yeah, that kind of idea that she is irresistible and kind of this picture of innocence and yet the complete opposite of it all rolled into one. I just think, yeah, really, really wonderful.
Yeah, I think she does this wonderful job of her voice is like honey. It kind of just and it's like honey in that it's sweet, but if you're not careful, you'll get stuck in it as well. You're not going to be able to escape from it, and it's very obvious that it really comes across with her vocal performance how she gets people to underestimate her all the time, even though, all right, she's got this fearsome reputation within whichever person she comes across, and they know she's a dangerous person, yet every time.
I mean, she has got this golden demon that's fierce, they can see. Yeah.
So for me, those were especially in Northern Lights, those three performances, I think, really carry that first book through, and kind of especially that sequence where that evil monkey grabs hold of like Pantomime, and the way she just calmly just says, you're just going to be a nice girl now for the rest of this party. The way she gets through that sequence is just, oh, wow. Yes.
And I think that is a very good scene to pull out for that comparison with the TV thing as well. Because, you know, if you analyse those two different actors' performances of that scene, I think, yeah, you have very different tones. You have one that just kind of gets very angry, is effective, but isn't what I find in the book, like with this one, where, yeah, it's that really calm, controlled, and it's almost more terrifying because she's not letting go. She's not letting loose of that anger, and that almost makes it, yeah, even more scary and sinister.
Yeah, because there's that kind of element of gaslighting in there as well, isn't there? Yeah, it's just kind of like, well, you know, this is your fault that this has happened, sort of thing. So yeah, so that is particularly terrifying, really. So
I think also as well, you were saying about Asriel, and I think we've got to commend the fact that the performer for Lord Asriel also does quite a lot of other voices.
Yes.
I know that partly from the credits, and then also there's just some distinctiveness about his voice that you can't quite hide when he's doing other things, and certainly in like the last book doing the kind of the poetry voiceovers and stuff, which are great, and you can tell that it is kind of the same person. But that doesn't, I don't think that pulls away from it for me. I know often we commend people who can change their voice so much you've no idea it's also them, but I think actually, you know, we can credit this guy for doing amazing performances of different characters where even if you do know, okay, maybe it's the same person reading it, it doesn't in any way ruin any sort of illusion. He still does a fantastic job of being these different people. And yeah, I think that's definitely something to commend there for sure.
Yeah, there's kind of a certain reverb, kind of like there's a very kind of like his, I don't want to say if his voice is deep, but there's kind of like there's a depth and richness, especially when he's Lord Asriel, kind of like that sense of contempt that he feels for everyone around him is kind of, it runs all the way through the performance, which I think, I mean, I definitely picked up he was playing other characters, but the fact that he really nailed like Lord Asriel's like arrogance.
Oh,
it's just, I'd kind of forgotten how horrible Lord Asriel was and how horrible Mrs. Coulter was and how horrible many of the adults in this in this story were, and especially in kind of Northern Lights, I think there's maybe a bit of better balance between, you know, good grown-ups and bad grown-ups.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about the trilogy as a whole, is that idea, and that, you know, I think they do say it in the final book, it's that idea that good and bad isn't who you are, it's what you do. You know, that idea that different people can do really terrible things, people can do really good things, and maybe we don't need to get bogged down in, are they good people or are they bad people? We don't need to get bogged down in that judgment, but we can still appreciate right and wrong of actions and stuff. And I think that is a massive theme throughout the entire thing that, yeah, like you say, comes across in that.
Yeah.
Before we move off on voices, I just wanted to talk about Pantalaimmon's voice, because this is maybe a slight criticism. Obviously, you know how much I love this book and will defend it to my death, but I can also be a little bit critical as well. There's clearly a choice where his voice is quite different, often when changing shape. So, because children's demons can change shape to different animals.
Yeah,
it was a bit strange for me.
Yeah.
I don't know that I liked it. I sort of maybe see why that would be a good idea. I don't know that I loved it. Yeah, what did you think?
So I got like a little bit confused because it felt like he was changing accents at some points. So I was just, then I was wondering, is this like a deliberate decision, or is this kind of the actor's natural accent coming through and he's not being able to?
I get
so I mean, but the point that you made about maybe he has different voices in different animals, that's not something that had ever actually occurred to me. And if that is a choice that they've made in the direction, then that's quite clever, but it may be a bit too clever.
The most successful. I get you. I think my impression is, my just complete guess is that I think maybe it was some way of, without visuals, doing a bit more to indicate that change thing. But yeah, like you say, I'm not sure it fully hits the nail on the head all of the time. It was a bit of a strange choice to me. Still wonderful, doesn't in any way ruin it. But yeah, I just wanted to, I wondered what you thought about that.
I did notice the change in accents. So let's get onto the plot a little bit of Northern Lights. We start with Lyra. She's basically, I'd forgotten what a tricky character Lyra is at sometimes, because she's this boastful, arrogant, loudmouth liar. That just kind of, she's like the kid in your class that is, oh, well, my uncle did this. And so I had there was a boy that I used to go to school with, and his dad used to work in films, and he'd always come back with stories about, oh yeah, I was allowed on this film set, and I met this actress, and oh, I did this and I did that. And he was just bullshitting all the time. And he kind of, that very much reminded me of kind of like Lyra, this very confident young girl, but she feels like she needs to be like the boss and the center of attention a lot of the time. And that's something I'd forgotten.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It is funny thinking about that now when having finished all 3 books, and that kind of that change in her, a lot of it with Will's influence, another character that comes in, but also, like you say, that, wanting to be center of attention, and yet she is, as that blurb indicated, the center of all these universes. She is the decider of this outcome of this battle. All the destiny and fate and stuff ends on her shoulders, and yet rather than that, encouraging the I must be the center of attention thing, it does the opposite. It kind of humbles her in a way, which is really quite interesting, that what she wants is to be the most important person. Arguably you could say that that's what she wants in the beginning ones, and yet when it turns out she is, actually she changes in different ways.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found really struck me as curious was how Lyra was raised in this university setting. And one thing that I couldn't quite square was it just the way that it's described in the book. There doesn't seem to be a lot of female children around. She does seem to be mostly spending her time with boys. I was just wondering if that struck you as odd as well or not.
It wasn't necessarily so much that bit was odd. It was more that when you have comments from people of, oh, you need to spend more time with girls your age, thing that just kind of annoyed me.
Yeah.
Because she was perfectly happy with, the Clay children. I think maybe it's less so much the fact that she was around a lot of boys, and more the fact that it didn't matter what their gender was, and so you didn't really know. It was just the children from the clay beds and the Egyptian children and the townies, and it was that kind of thing. It was groups of children, and gender didn't really matter, which is probably part of tying into those themes of changes when you go through puberty and stuff like that. That's such a big thing in the book, plot wise, not just thematically. But I think it almost highlights, and I don't think this was the intention with comments that are made, it almost highlights that idea of why should we have to lose that, thing where it didn't matter to her who she was hanging around with, and it was just other kids, and that's what mattered, as opposed to, kind of you get things of, oh, because young girls your age know certain things that, and it's just that I don't think is really necessary, sort of goes backwards a bit.
I think so. I think that for me, just from like a world building perspective, I just found it odd that none of the university staff had like girls,
had daughters,
children. It was just like, where are all the daughters? I don't understand. Are they shut down in the basement somewhere? So I didn't really understand that. And kind of the other thing that really does come across in the book, well, certainly my interpretation of like the way Pullman performed it, and from the vocal performance of Lyra, is how desperate Lyra is for love and affection. Kind of there's that real, it does come across like she's getting little bits of pieces of affection from lots of different people, but there's not that one contained like source that's kind of like focused purely on her. And that like you
say, I mean, she didn't have a single parent or even parental figure. That's like you're saying about that uniqueness of the situation that she's in. It's not even like, okay, the parents that she has aren't her biological parents, but they're still just as much her parents. It isn't that. She doesn't have parental figures. She has adults in her life, but not parental figures. And that possibly does, like you say, lead into that really desperately wanting affection from people. And it is then interesting when you have Will's story coming in there, and there's a very clear difference there because of his strong relationship with his mother and how important that parental figure is to him.
I think that's definitely true. Can we say, I mean, if we were to put a poll out on like worst literary parents. I think I think Lyra's would be perhaps close. I think they'd be like firm favourites, really.
Very possibly. Yeah,
Yeah, I
apart from
think.
maybe Matilda's parents are probably going to storm away with it.
Oh, that's a good
But
shout. Actually,
you make a good point.
that's a good shout. Matilda's parents are pretty
Pretty
awful
awful.
as well. But that's it. I don't think. Oh, you don't know. Yeah, they are actually pretty awful as well. But yes, I think.
In a different way of awful. There's a
Yes.
sort of like ignorant negligence, whereas I don't know, Lyra's parents do some pretty bad stuff in full knowledge of what they're doing.
Yeah. So Lyra kind of basically sets off on these adventures. She meets Mrs. Coulter, and she thinks she's going to have a certain relationship with her, and it turns into something more sinister, and she manages to escape and finds herself amongst friends with Egyptians. So that's I think that's a really clever thing that Pullman does throughout the series, is using things that are familiar but giving them slightly different names, which kind of gives them, I don't want to say exoticism, but kind of it does make you realize you're living in a world where it has had a different history and things have gone differently.
Yes, I mean, I loved that. And things with being a bit, well, not a bit, with being a big language nerd, things like the idea that these parallel worlds, in the parallel Englands, they both speak English, and yet there are some words that are different. So, electric and baric, there's marzipan and margepane, or something like that. There are those parallels of just like, even down to the details of language. You know, they all speak the same language, and yet there are some things that are exactly the same, and they use different words for them. But yeah, like you say, that world building is just fantastic to think about that.
So, I mean, just to go off on a bit of a tangent on the world building. So, like, religion obviously plays
Yes.
is a massive theme throughout the book, and I think Pullman himself is kind of quite a big critic of like organized religion. One of the things that didn't strike me as from other literature that I've read and kind of other stories that I've encountered about living underneath a religious regime, there's a certain oppression that affects the way that people go around their everyday lives, and that didn't really come across to me in the books. So I don't know if that occurred to you either.
That is a good point, and it isn't something I had massively thought of, because yeah, a lot of the kind of corruption and stuff that's talked about with the church, the magisterium, and things like that is on a much higher level, isn't it? As sort of detached from the regular people, I guess, isn't it? Yeah, I think potentially so. The Book of Dust is another trilogy connected in the same world and stuff like that. So La Belle Sauvage is like a prequel to the trilogy, and then you've got The Secret Commonwealth comes after the His Dark Materials Trilogy, and then there's going to be a third one. And I think in La Belle Sauvage you potentially get a bit more of that, because I mean there is a bit of this when they're searching for Lyra, when they're searching for Lee, and you've kind of got you've got the officers of the magisterium searching everywhere, you know, when she goes missing, and they're searching all the boats.
That's
and they've got
true,
the zeppelins
actually.
flying over. Yeah, and you do get that definitely in La Belle Sauvage, that kind of surveillance and hiding kind of thing. But yeah, I do completely get your point. There isn't that same kind of, I guess, dystopian idea that people are overly oppressed. I don't know if maybe that's because he really wants to drill home that Lyra's world is not so different to ours.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't need to be this dystopian thing where you always feel like, oh, the church is so evil, to still see that there are massive problems of corruption and evilness within it, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about one thing that did come to mind was Marjam Satrapi's Persepolis. It's also a biographical graphic novel about her life in Iran, and it's just a lot of little things that niggle on kind of like, well, you have to wear this uniform, or you're expected to behave, you know, young ladies are expected to behave in such and such a way. And I think there's a little bit of that in certainly in Northern Lights, and I think a little bit also in the Amber Spyglass as well, where, you know, as a young lady she's expected to have certain manners and stuff like that. But I didn't know whether that was kind of down to whether the fact that it felt like it was more like a Victorian time, or
I
whether
was just
that's
gonna say,
yeah,
it gives me more the impression that it's that kind of thing. So, like how she objects when Will suggests she should be wearing trousers to fit in our world,
yeah, yeah,
that kind of thing. Yeah, to me, it definitely seemed more like that kind of we're in the past rather than we're in a really oppressive place. But I do definitely get your point.
yeah. So I think my favorite section in one of my favorite sections, one of my two favorite sections in the Northern Lights is the journey up north with the gypsies. I just love that entire section where she's building these relationships
Yeah.
with these people who've quite knit tight family units that have suffered this unbearable loss of the state essentially covering up the kidnap of their children for some nefarious purpose. Maybe I should roll back on kind of like my previous comment, because like the state covering up the
kids going missing,
yeah, maybe that is pretty bad. Yeah, so
but
maybe I
it's
should roll back
also
on that a little bit.
yeah, but it also doesn't feel like everyday life, does it? It again
Yeah.
feels like something a bit beyond that. I mean, hopefully not like everyday life. But yeah, so I do still think your point stands. Yeah, but yeah, that journey definitely, and all those characters are fabulous.
Yeah, I loved. What's the name of the old Egyptian? Not the.
So it's either Lord Far or Far Decorum.
Father Court. Yeah, I loved the performance by
oh
by
gosh,
Philip.
yeah,
it's so fantastic.
And like how
really
you can tell the
fantastic.
size of a person from their voice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Father Coram is just fantastic, and that John Farr's got this like booming kind of like presence whenever he's whenever he's performing as well. So I love those characters, and there was that sense of like anticipation that something exciting was about to happen as well. So like Lyra thinks she's maybe going on a little bit of a jaunt and not really realizing kind of the full extent of the danger that they're in quite yet. And then obviously they reach the North Pole. Well, it's not the North Pole. Where did they actually go to?
To Svalbard.
Svalbard, yeah. So that section there where it moves from kind of spy Michael Caine stuff to spy more like James Bond stuff, where it does become about them kind of like doing more actiony things as well.
Definitely, there certainly is a lot of action. Yeah, I get you. I think if we're going on favourite moments, my favourite moment, even though it absolutely wrecks me every time, is in between those two things. And I'll not spoil plot so much, but when you get to it, when you listen, listeners, you'll know exactly what I mean, is with when they find Tony Makarios and all the stuff with Rata, with the dead fish, and with the coin. And that poignant moment has always stuck with me. It's something that they don't do properly in the TV version. I was told by someone on the forum very rudely about, oh no, they said it just didn't look right. And I'll be perfectly honest, I think that moment is so important that if you're creating that TV show, you make it look right. I think that is of all three books, even, that really is the moment of the book. It sums up, like you say, the stuff about Lyra and her personality. It sums up what's actually going on. This whole stuff about people and their demons, about children, about right and wrong. It just, everything is in that moment for me.
Yeah, I think it is really devastating moment, and it's exactly kind of when you're telling a story, it's very much about show not tell, and that entire sequence shows who Lyra is, shows what her values are, and it fully demonstrates the I don't know if evils are a strong enough word, but the callousness of what the magisterium are doing to these children.
Especially because it's a thing that we can't relate to, not having demons. It's something that it's they keep drilling in through the book. This is weird in Lyra's world. This is important in Lyra's world. And we just kind of have to go along with it and believe it. But the emotion in that makes us go, okay, we have no parallel to this. We can't actually imagine it. And yet we can fully imagine and empathize with this. Just exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is there are a lot of like different standout moments in the book. So I think For me, one of the standout moments is one I've already mentioned previously, where Mrs. Coulter kind of like, not Mrs. Coulter, but the monkey grabs hold of Pantomime, and that for me is one of the standout moments. And then a little later on, where Lyra, kind of in the North Pole, where Lyra and Mrs. Coulter confront each other about what's going on in the research facility as though that's kind of another sequence there. So let's try and wrap up the discussion, like, because we've got 2 other books.
Yeah, well, I think we are going to do a lot of kind of stuff that is general across all 3 of them. I think to kind of avoid some spoilers for some people, and then also because obviously, and this is a good thing, the style across them is pretty much the same. One actual thing that is specific to Northern Lights, though, that I wanted to talk about now. So I was saying I started listening to them again with my CD copies. And in that you have a woman who goes, end of side 2 at the end of stuff when you've got to change CDs over. And I thought it was really interesting when I then partway through it switched to our review copies from Penguin and noticed that she was still in there. I don't think she was saying end of side 2, but I think she just say the end of the parts. And I think she even does a cast list at the end of the parts. As like a kind of credits sequence, and that kind of makes sense a lot when it's done in 3 box sets of CDs. But I thought it was an interesting choice that they decided to leave that in there for this re-release. What did you think about that? Did that seem weird to you when you heard it?
I think I don't think it did seem weird. I think it really did help. It helped break up my listening experience, because if you've just got like, and it's quite a rich listening experience as well. It's a full cast audio. I think I did appreciate the fact that, all right, so now I can take a little bit of a break. They've decided this is where I can take a little bit of break, go off, do something else, listen to something else, and then come back to it. If it was just one continuous thing, I might have found it a bit more of a slog to get.
That's really interesting.
I'm not saying it was a slog. I'm just saying.
Do you like that? Still
I like that. I like that. I enjoyed that. There's just one other moment that I want to catch out in Northern Lights, and it's where the monkey and the snow leopard are massaging each other, and just I didn't like it at all, Poppy. I didn't like it.
That's
it was
fair.
really creepy. It was just, oh no, don't do that.
I appreciate that, and I think the fact that the amount of emphasis Philip puts on this idea that touching demons, as in someone touching someone else's demon, is such a intimate thing. The word intimate and its connotations then does mean when touching demons happens in any sort of way, it does have an edge of slightly weirdness to it. I will definitely give you that. And just the like, action of stroking and
I immediately kind of it was like, maybe I don't want to say walking on your parents doing something, but it was kind of it did give me that kind of like weird, I don't like that. Like, Lyra shouldn't be seeing this, certainly.
It's also awkward just in the fact of how weird their relationship is anyway. I think that helps make it awkward.
Their relationship is really kind of, there's that weird balance of power. They're kind of, she's trying to seduce him while he's trying to seduce her, and it's a very like toxic relationship.
Yes.
Really, definitely 2 people that should have had walls built to keep them separate. Really. So at the end of Northern Lights, something quite devastating happens, and Lyra is basically projected into our world, essentially. I think
not directly yet.
The closest analogy. But
so there's this middle world. There's Chitagatsu first, and to make sure I don't forget, and I mean I wouldn't, I'm sure he would come back to it, but I love the fact that most, though not all, but most of the children in this world have sort of like Italian-y accents that mimic the kind of Italian names for buildings and stuff like that and things. I really like that. Obviously you don't get that in the text, but or certainly not in the same sort of way as you get in the audio, those accents that match with like I say, the name of the place, the name of the tower, just stuff like that. Hearing those kind of Italian style accents is really beautiful. Again, missing a bit from the TV one. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. Yeah, I think one thing I want to say when we're going for like talking about all three of them is they definitely, work as one. And like we said, it's really interesting hearing the changes of Lyra throughout them, but I also really like how they're three very different books. Like you say, you have that kind of spy sneaking around, we're sort of trying to figure out what's going on, and there's lots of action in there in the first one. The second one is really different, and you have a second major character that comes in there. It becomes a story about the two of them rather than one of them, which is really fascinating. And then the third one is different again. It becomes much more philosophical in the third one. So, and yeah, I think that's really interesting that although all three go together as a wonderful trilogy, they also are not repeats. It's not like it's a trilogy where the second book follows the same format as the first one. They are very different books that tell part of the same story.
So that's interesting you say that, because I feel, for me, The Subtle Knife and Northern Lights, they flow into each other quite well. So there's still, for me, The Subtle Knife still is sort of a spy story, but it's more, but it's maybe a spy slash heist story. So there's kind of like that, there's kind of like Will and Lyra trying to get access to certain objects that get taken away from them. I think that's, for me, those two books flowed into each other. For me, the Amber Spyglass is kind of quite a massive departure from the two previous tomes, really. I think I think part of that's just due to its sheer length. It's a big old beast, and I also think it's more of a polemic as well, really. It's kind of Philip Pullman espousing his views on the way the world is and the way it should be, where that to me was, I wouldn't say it was missing from the previous two, but it was more in like the subtext of what was being said in the story, where it is far more explicit in the Amber Spyglass.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, one of the things about it is, in this story, has been heavily influenced by Keats' poems, specifically Innocence and Experience, like those sets of poems, and also by Milton's Paradise Lost. And another thing I'd misremembered is these little poetry sections at the beginning of each chapter, pretty much, in the third book.
Yes.
Because they make such a big impression, I had misremembered, and I thought that they were sort of all the way through, all three of them. I'd forgotten that it was only when you get to there that you have those in there. So yeah, like you say, that's a big thing. He really makes explicit rather than just implicit reference to his kind of inspirations and sources and stuff like that in the third book.
Yeah. Just curiously, out of the three books, which one, if you'd to choose a favourite, which one would be your favourite? Because for me, it's The Subtle Knife. I just love that kind of burgeoning relationship between Lyra and Will, and it is just about, for me, like it's just about perfect in terms of, if I was going to suggest a book to a 12-year-old to read that wants kind of like action, adventure, intrigue, and kind of really charismatic characters as well.
I hate that you're doing this to me.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing to me.
Yeah.
Because I really don't want to pick. And because I do see them as all so different, I do find it really hard. I think if I were really, really pushed, then I maybe would agree with you.
Yeah.
I really like the fact that Will also comes into it, and yet Lyra isn't in any way taken away from it. I like that you have the two of them together. You've got those parallel stories that are just, really good. You've got the world travel, which is really exciting. You have, even though you don't have so much maybe of the world building of what are demons, you do have that explored on and built on, definitely, throughout it. So yeah, I think that is possibly, it's in no way to say that the other two aren't as good, because they really are. But yeah, if you're going to force me to pick, then yeah, maybe I do like that best. And the only thing that would pip it is because of the fact that Will comes into it and adds a real different element to it as another really major, really interesting character.
Yeah, and I do find it curious that they did decide to change the performers for Will. Because
I think it was probably more of a availability issue than a conscious decision, if I was making a guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a shame because that first performance is certainly really good. Really
Yeah, I
good.
mean, yeah, it was just odd, I felt.
Mm.
So yeah, we end up in Chicago. This is kind of really a nightmare setting,
Mm.
isn't it? It's kind of,
In a lot of ways, yeah.
kind of the adults have kind of disappeared from the world. When I, like, my recollections of reading it ages ago and then re-listening to the audiobook is how, I don't know, so wild, but kind of very much did kind of bring into mind of things like Lord of the Flies
I thought you were going to
and
say that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, kind of, yeah, that sort of thing where the children have been left kind of like wrong amok. And I don't think it's described in the book, but I just had the idea because it sounds like a Mediterranean world, kind of like that hazy heat, kind of making people quick to temper and tired, and there's just kind of a drain on the world going through Chigadze or Titagaze, sorry.
No, it's fine. And I mean, in all fairness, I think they pronounce it a little bit differently in
Yeah,
different places
yeah,
as well. But yeah, it is fascinating. And it is that, obviously, like we've talked about, it is really interesting when you have that idea of we're coming into our world, in some ways kind of breaking the fourth wall.
yeah.
In the first book, we already feel like Lyra's Oxford is quite familiar to us. And then we're shown, oh, well, here you go, here's your Oxford kind of thing. That's really cool. But then also to have a world that is so different and also really, really fleshed out. It's kind of, Pullman gets the chance to come up with something completely new and different. And then again, with the world that the Mulefa are in the third book as well. So we have stuff that's kind of close to home and stuff that is fantastical as something really different that we're not used to.
Yeah, and that entire sequence where Will manages to obtain the knife, he becomes the knife bearer. I think that's maybe the most thrilling sequence in
Fair.
all three of the books. I think that's kind of like one of my favorite sequences, that entire fight between Will and what's the name of the boy that is, it's not Paolo, is
I
it?
think it is Ortulio. Paolo is the younger one.
Yeah, and kind of Lyra playing her part in that as well. I just, like, for me, that kind of really had me on the edge of my seat, even though I already knew what the outcome of it of it. So that's, I mean, it just goes to show how brilliant Philip Pullman's writing is, doesn't it? Because like when you already kind of know what the destination is, but you're still pulled in by, especially his narration during those sequences is just fantastic.
Definitely is. Speaking of his narration, one thing I wanted to talk about in the third book is when Lyra's in kind of a dream state and sort of visiting the world of the dead in a dream.
Yes.
You've got some really cool... So there's not a lot of sound effects in this audiobook that I'm sure we'll talk about, but in this there is kind of whistling wind going on. And what I really like is Pullman's narration is then a lot quieter, and also the performers are a lot quieter, but it's not just like someone recorded them and turned the volume down. It's not like it was a last minute decision to add this whistling wind and make it all sound different. It's like they knew that they were going to whisper a little bit when they were saying these lines. And it was like it was already planned from the very beginning that there was going to be this whistling wind and it was going to feel whispery, because you can hear that in their voices. It's not just that they're quieter, it's that they are whisperier and the pace is different, and that's just wonderful. And obviously a lot of people say that one of the good things, and I agree with them, about authors reading their own work is that even though one of the great things about books is we can come up with our own things, sometimes we want to know what the author intended. They're the ones that wrote the words have been put down, how did they want us to read them, and that's one of the good reasons of having authors reading their books for audiobook. But not all authors are going to be great readers, but Pullman just really is, really is.
Yeah, he does do a superb job. His intonation and the pace at which he narrates, and I think the other thing that really does enhance his performance is the fact that he's not lumbered with maybe doing the different character voices. I think that really does enhance his narration quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because obviously as a listener, it's really nice to listen to such different voices because they're actually coming from different people, and, you know, trained actors, trained radio actors that are used to voice acting and stuff like that does make it just absolutely brilliant thing. It's the main reason I love it so much. But yeah, that you make a very good point that his narration isn't hindered because he doesn't have to worry about that kind of thing. He just needs to worry about that part. I totally agree with that. And while we're on really good parts and stuff, there was just one moment I definitely wanted to say about. So the actor that plays Mary Malone, there was a part when she like puts her like hair behind her ear, I think, or something like that, and she's just saying something like that. And just the way that she did it, you could see her doing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy that in that moment where everything is just audio, and yeah, you have the words telling you that she does that, but it really brought it to life for me. It's so weird that just that one little moment was just perfect. I could just see her doing it. Like, I'm sure she must have been doing it in the recording studio to get it to sound that, you know, perfectly timed and stuff like that. And things where there was like, it was a conversation, I cannot remember which bit, but I wrote a note about it, that there was like a while someone else was talking. And now on the page, that's so difficult to represent overlapping.
Yeah.
Like, even in script writing, representing overlapping very nicely is a really clunky thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's one of the benefits of audio. You have little overlappy things like that just make things sound so natural and beautiful and wonderful.
Yes, I mean, just going back to moments of Mrs. Coulter, particularly in this book, her entire relationship with Sir Charles, I just thought was just what a creep, what an absolute slime ball. And those two kind of dueling with each other about the information that she's, you know, she basically, I don't say seduces him, but she's able to cajole
lead him
this
on.
information. You lead him on, get kind of information out of him with giving very, very little away herself. And it was just
a bit more creepy demon touching, though.
I don't like it. I don't like it. There's a little bit more creepy demon touching between those two. Is that in the Amber Spyglass, or it's in the Subtle Knife, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is in the Subtle Knife. It's two evil people kind of trying to out evil each other. So I particularly enjoyed that. One thing I wanted to mention really quickly is Philip Pullman's knack for writing really good names. For characters like you know, Pecolina, Serafina, or Serafina Piccola,
I have
Stanislaus Grunman.
I have a very important comment on Serafina. Can't believe I didn't mention earlier, but we got 2 new kittens last year, and one of them is named Errol after the dragon in God's Guards, Terry Pratchett. And the other one is called Serafina. And we kind of all agreed on that as a household, as we do with our pet names. But my mum has a shortcut on her phone that when she starts writing Serafina, it auto-corrects to Serafina Peccola, Queen of the Lake Inara clan. And every single text message that we get from my mum that's about Serafina will say, Serafina Peccola, Queen of the Lake Inara clan, was, you know, chasing a bobble on the floor the other day or something like that. So yes, I definitely agree that that's a great name, and I will tell both my mum and Serafina that you think she's got a great name. Yeah, she's got, you know, fantastic. Yorick Berison, another fantastic name. And people might think, while we talk about, as someone who writes, it's like one of the things I find hardest to do is give characters names. It's really, you know, really difficult to kind of to name a character that's not too much on the nose, but also give you a sense about who this person is and how they kind of fit into the world. And there's another really interesting snippet from the interview with Ruth Wilson and Philip Pullman about how he actually went about naming their characters, and you know, especially Yorick, kind of like that kind of means bear in I think Icelandic or whatever it is. So it's fantastic, fantastic names. So I love that as well. Agreed, yeah, definitely. I think I'd quite like to talk about just a little bit about music and stuff. So we talked about how there wasn't really a whole lot of sound effects. It's kind of a nice thing because it does differentiate it from being like a radio play. You know, people hear the kind of full cast thing, and I think the word dramatization is used on some stuff, even though it is unabridged.
Well, it's not really. It's not really a dramatization.
Yeah, but I think just the fact that because it is that full cast thing. It is like a drama in that sense, but they haven't, you know, overdone sound effects, because it does feel very much like the book, but the characters are, you know, read by different people, and it is very theatrical in that sense. You know, you do get a sense of them as individual people, but yeah, it isn't so much a dramatization, and it is, you know, unabridged. But yeah, when it comes to music and stuff, I think there's still not tons of it, and when there is some, mostly it's quite nice. But I'll be honest, I didn't love the music in Northern Lights, but I think it was more just because it was really showing its age. I thought, I don't know if you agreed, it was really quite tinny and stuff, and it sort of made me think of like old like sci-fi
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
like when they have kind of, you know, spaceships on strings sort of effects, and you know, it's not that that's bad, it's that that's telling of the time it was done. And yeah, I just felt the music of Northern Lights just seemed not necessarily bad, but I didn't so much like it, and I did feel it was showing that it was of a certain time.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, yes, I can kind of agree where you're coming from. It's not something that I noticed
That's
initially,
fair.
but yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But now that you mention it, I do. It was a little bit Doctor Who-y,
Yes.
kind of.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, kind of Doctor Who-y. Is Doctor Who-y a word? I don't know, but kind of
It
that
was.
kind
We'll
of,
have it.
yeah,
We'll it. Yeah.
yeah. But it's kind of that kind of like 80s, early 90s sci-fi thing
Mm,
going on there.
yeah. It's kind of interesting.
As well. So there was one thing that I wanted to kind of mention really quickly about the subtle knife, and that's kind of the stuff with Will's dad. That is stuff that I'd completely forgotten.
Oh,
I
really?
completely forgotten that Will's dad was in these books.
Mm,
So that was a really nice, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I kind of enjoyed those sections.
mm,
I think he is a character. He's, you know, that person as a character is mentioned in the first book, so it's very
hmm.
nice that that character has kind of brought back into the second and third books, and has
Yeah.
this, that, you know, greater influence on what the story happens. And I especially enjoyed his relationship with Lee Scoresby, who I
Yeah.
think is one of the best characters in the books as well.
Yeah. I agree. I think he is a fantastic character. I'm very glad he was in there. Like you say, that relationship with Lee is really cool, is really well done. I think maybe a bit of an oversight with the fact that, you know, Lee makes him make a promise, and Lee is saying, "I will haunt you forever if
Yeah.
you break this promise," and then the
Oh
narrator goes,
yes.
"He broke that promise," and then
Yes.
they're together afterwards, and no. There doesn't seem to be anything that they care about, that he straight up broke that promise. But I guess
Yeah.
because it worked out all right anyway, sort of.
Oh,
He didn't need to make the promise for it to happen.
well, the thing is, Lee might not be aware that he's broken the promise, and by the time
Exactly,
he is
yeah, because
aware
it
that
does work
he's,
out. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it does actually, what he asked him to do was to keep Will and Lyra together, which inadvertently happens. So yes, so I guess that
yes,
does work out all right.
yeah,
But also, I really like about the audio the fact that when you have the letters from his father, they're then narrated in the voice of the actor for his father. And that
yes,
is something that I think you'll probably miss if you just read it, because yeah, they're still beautiful, heartfelt letters, but there was something really nice about hearing his voice read them that was just really magical, I felt.
yeah. And I think it really does get across. You know, I mentioned previously, Lyra is someone who's kind of desperately looking. Well, not looking, but she's someone who desperately does need love and affection from a
Mm.
one powerful source that's kind of focused on her. I think that's kind of true with Will. He's focused a lot of his
Mm.
love and affection on his mother, but he's desperately, you know, missing this male figure in his life to kind of protect him while he's protecting his mother. And those letters really, they were so sad in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, because you kind of, you know, that they've missed out on so much
Yeah.
of their lives with each other.
For sure, definitely. I agree. I think just before we round up and stuff, we really should. I know we've kind of mentioned a little bit
Yeah,
about what's in the interview, and obviously we're not
yeah,
going to spoil it all,
yeah.
because this is why you should go out and buy the audiobook and listen to it. But just kind of a bit of a selling point on that, because obviously Pullman has been around for a while. He's been famous for a while from these books that were out so long ago. There are plenty of interviews with him. You might be wondering maybe, well, what am I going to gain from this one? But I do think it was really, really good. I think you learn a lot of really fascinating things about Pullman and his past. Writers will enjoy hearing about like his process and stuff. Obviously, he's written a lot about his writing, but even so, I think there were maybe some insights in here that were kind of different and nice. But you also learn a lot about Ruth Wilson as well, which is kind of cool. Philip kind of asks her some questions, and it's a bit of a kind of dual interview, but not in a sense of like, it doesn't feel like he was told, oh, prepare some questions to ask Ruth, and he's sort of like had to go through them. It more seems spontaneous, like he's just really curious about stuff about her career and things like that. They talk about all sorts. They talk about religion. They talk about theatre, which I loved. With my drama background, I found that really fascinating. Theatre in general. It made me sad I've not seen the stage version for His Dark Materials, but you know, there we go.
Yeah.
But learning about acting from her professional background, her acting training, and then also Philip and his love of theatre in general. They talk a lot about the book. Something that I don't love from the book is this idea that humans are somehow, you know, so much different to animals, and they have consciousness where animals don't, and I disagree with that. I can tell from my pets, Serafina especially, in her big personality, that that's not the case. And Pullman does go, you know, animals certainly are, my dogs certainly are, and stuff like that. So it was nice to hear him admit that maybe that's not a massive thing from the book. And yeah, there's such a range of stuff that they talk about in there that I think it's really, really worth listening to for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, my favorite moment from the interview, and it's a slight spoilers, kind of Ruth's approach to Mrs. Coulter, and the fact that she says that, well, like she's half monkey, so I wanted to bring that monkey into the way that she moved around a little bit, and I thought, oh, that's really good. That's not something that would have occurred to me.
I found that really interesting as well. And, you know, that idea that I think is one of the reasons why so many people love this book is that idea of that you are connected to a kind of animal form and what that says about you and your personality. And, you know, there's loads of what is your demon quizzes and stuff like that are really, really cool. One thing I really liked about it is that Pullman says the phrase of children and adults aren't different, which is really funny when the whole of the book, basically the whole of the trilogy, is about how they are. But he's meaning it in that kind of sense of the audience. He says about like an audience that includes children but doesn't consist of them, and includes adults but doesn't consist of them either. And I really liked that. I think that's my view on stuff like children's books and YA books and things like that. It's this idea that if everyone could just appreciate that things can be marketed a certain way, but the audience can be a whole mix of people and not be, you know, defined by any of them, and no person and what they read needs to worry about those definitions and stuff like that. But yeah, it was really good.
This is probably really well off topic, but I was reading I can't remember if it was a seminar I attended or if it was a Twitter thread, but they was talking about this YA book. And they decided, well, it's selling really well, let's see if we can sell it to adults. So they just kind of like changed the cover on it. And I think they added, I don't know if the author added it in or if it was like an editorial decision and it was taken out because it was YA, but they kind of like added a slightly more explicit sex scene.
Is this not from our own podcast that you're remembering? Is this not what I was saying about Double Shadow?
Oh, maybe it's right. Maybe that's
I'm glad that you think I'm either a seminar leader or a professional on Twitter, but I will take it.
Yeah. So So I can kind of I'm slightly lost for words now. Let's have a quick chat about the Amber Spyglass. So this is for me. I forgot how wild this was. It's a sprawling epic war story, really, and that's why for me is it kind of impacted slightly differently to Northern Lights and The Subtle Knife, because to me, like, the Northern Lights is kind of like it's an espionage thriller, and The Subtle Knife in my head is a heist movie, perhaps, where the Amber Spyglass is this sprawling war epic, and whereas Northern Lights is focused on Lyra, and The Subtle Knife is very much about Lyra and Will. There are so many different characters in the Amber Spyglass. We've got Mary Malone. She takes quite a prominent role
Yeah.
in the book. There's quite large sections focused on Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel. And again, those sections with Will and Lyra. So I was just wondering, for me, this is the most difficult of the 3 books to discuss because there's so much in there, and I was finding it quite difficult to pick out 2 or 3 points to discuss. So I was just wondering maybe if you'd like to kind of lead on what you felt about the Amber Spyglass, the themes, the performances, and the characters, and that sort of thing.
Sure, I mean, I can certainly give it a go. It's interesting what you say that about it being like a war epic. I kind of hadn't considered that. And I think because I'm not super into like war stuff massively, but it's interesting what we've talked about with like Slain and Guthrin and stuff, like kind of that's different to enjoying the violence, I think. And this is maybe something that I hadn't quite realised, but you've made me think about, is that where in the Northern Lights you have fighting, with the armoured bears, there are fights that happen. It's not like war, whereas in this one you have that kind of idea of generals that are sitting up on a high tower moving pieces. It's that strategic part of war that's different to the battle. And I think maybe that's the thing that I'm less interested in, with kind of why I read less things set in war and stuff like that, is that while battles in stuff can be interesting and exciting to read about and to listen to, that I'm not really that interested in like the strategy of war kind of thing. And I think that's sort of something that I'm aware all the books are leading up to this war for heaven, effectively, and that is such an important thing, and yet it doesn't actually feature that high in my memory of that final book. It's sort of something that I feel we sort of go through, personally, whereas the things that stood out to me more are these ideas of we're getting more to the crux of what is dust and what is consciousness and what is innocence and experience, and the amazing trips to the world of the dead, and the Mulefa, who really stuck in my mind. It was interesting because my partner overheard a bit of me listening to the Amber Spyglass and was like, "Are you still listening to His Dark Materials?" And I was like, "Yeah, do you not remember?" And he's like, "I don't remember these creatures and stuff." I'm like, what? If there's anything I remember from the Amber Spyglass from so many years ago, it is the Mulefa. They made a really big impression on me, but it just completely blanked them. So I kind of remembered those things, those philosophical things and those exciting things about the worlds and stuff, more than I'd remembered the war part of it. And I think even listening to it now, I sort of skimmed, if you can, in a listening sense, past those bits. So that's interesting. We both took a different approach.
It's interesting what sections made an impact on you as well. So for me, I'd completely forgotten a lot of the stuff with the Malefa and kind of the
Did you remember they existed though? Did you
No,
remember the wheels?
I didn't remember
this is
the
so
wheels.
Weird to me.
I didn't remember the wheels at all.
Wow.
And I'd completely misremembered what happened in the world of the dead. For some reason, in my memory, the witches had guided Will and Lyra through the world of the dead, and they'd kind of explained to them, in order to get through this place, this is what you're going to have to do, and it's going to be really painful. But that's not what happens at all. They kind of get that explanation towards the end of the book from the witches, so that must have got mixed up in my head. So that's kind of what my memory of it was. I do think the war section is, I don't want to say almost incidental, but it is maybe the least important part of the book. I think what's far more important is what happens in the land of the dead, kind of them making this decision regarding the fate of those who pass away. So that's one thing that I think is quite important. Then the second bit for me is just the sweet blossoming romance between Lyra and Will, and that kind of that awkwardness, when you like someone, and that, being able to approach that and having the confidence to be around with them, that kind of that warm joy that you feel, and that nervous energy and that confusion. That's what really stuck with me in the audio book. It might be a slightly weird comparison to make, but Skyward Sword, which is a Zelda game, was recently re-released, and that for me captured one of the best representations of when two people like each other, but they're just too slightly awkward to approach each other. So that sequence where Will and Lyra confess their feelings for each other, and kind of that, kind of reenacting that Garden of Eden moment, for me was breathtaking. It was I was just like, go on, you can do it, go on. It's just like, that is really, really lovely.
That's fair. One thing I really like about that is the fact that it's so different to her friendship with Roger.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things, I mean, even about like children and stuff like that, where you have opposite gender are really close, therefore we must couple them up. We must have a romantic link there. It must,
Yeah.
you know, it's too much around. And yet I really liked that her and Roger are friends, certainly from her perspective anyway. Her and Roger are friends, her and Will have something different. You know, I don't like that idea of more or less or whatever, but it's a different relationship, and I really like that Pullman does that really well. He doesn't do that classic thing that so many do, which is wrong for so many reasons, not least kind of heteronormative reasons,
Yeah.
and creepy, why are we coupling up kids in a in
Yeah.
an overly sexual way. But yeah, I really liked that there was a distinction between that friendship and that love. It didn't make any sort of like, you're worried about one is replacing the other kind of, because
Yeah.
they're really not. They have such different relationships with each other. And I really like that about it, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's so many characters that my heart broke for in this series, and Roger is definitely one of them. Kind of, this young boy that has his whole life ahead of him, and there's just these, through no fault of his own, these horrible adults do horrible, terrible things to him, and he doesn't really get a chance.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I really felt quite badly for Roger. So the Amber Spyglass does cover a lot of what Philip Pullman thinks about the nature of religion and the nature of human beings and consciousness and stuff like that. So I think it might be worth talking a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is the kind of thing where he's exploring, he's asking these questions, he's asking you to ask these questions of what does it mean? What is consciousness? What is sin? What is free will? All those kind of things is really...
Yeah, how we should live our lives. Is it about making ourselves happy first, or should we meet societal expectations? All these questions he kind of uses Mary Malone as a cipher. Mary Malone's Conversations with Lyra covers a lot of those topics.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is a nice thing. We've talked about how it becomes more explicit in this third book as to exploring what it means, but there is still some subtlety in there. It's not like it is straight up just telling you what stuff means.
Yeah.
It doesn't really lose that subtlety from the first two of, questioning things and, letting you make your own mind up about some stuff. Yeah, it doesn't become overly obvious and just telling you things. It does still have that beautiful subtlety of is really good writing.
Yeah, it's I think one of the things that we probably haven't explicitly said here is how good Philip Pullman is at writing dialogue. And those conversations in lesser hands would have been a little bit, I don't say wooden, but kind of heavy-handed, but there is a lightness and a sure-footedness in the way he's able to navigate through these tricky topics in a way that seems naturalistic and organic and coming from the heart of the characters.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And I think that's maybe a reason why this book, maybe more so than some others, really does lend itself to having this full cast, because it is really dialogue-led. And obviously, there are a lot of difficulties involved with trying to get a full cast to do something rather than just having one person reading it all. And this makes it worth it in this case because of how important the dialogue is in the story and the storytelling. So that is another reason why it's a really good match. And then I also think it's another good reason why just the audiobook in general is potentially better, in my opinion, than the printed word. There are some sentences where I think if I'd been left to read them myself, they wouldn't seem supernatural.
Yeah.
As in very natural, not like magic.
Yeah.
And I do find that with some books that I read, there'll be lines of dialogue where I go, that it doesn't really sound like a real person would say that, or it just doesn't sound natural, it doesn't sound right. And yet these performers, even though I felt that little twinge, it wasn't that I felt it because I did think it was unnatural. It's because I felt it thinking, if I read this on the page, I might think it were unnatural, like I felt other things were. But the performers pretty much exclusively always deliver those lines in such a way that it seems right that a person would say them.
Yeah. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it has been years since I've read the books, but there were certain lines in the narration and from the performers that did hit a lot harder. I think it had a kind of a greater impact than if I was just reading them within, the voice that narrates stories inside my head, especially that sequence where Lyra and Will realize the thing that they want most in the world for each other is something that they're not going to be able to necessarily manage. The performances from Joanna Wyatt and I believe it's Peter England there were it was so good. It was so good. You don't get that from reading it off a page as well. There was one thing about the Amber Spyglass that did annoy me slightly, and I think Philip Pullman's probably pretty good at doing his historical research. You're not able to kind of build alternative worlds unless you're very well read, and all the stuff about Svalbard and all that other stuff that goes to show that he's done his research. There's a sequence in the book where Will is having to reforge the knife, and I watch Forged in Fire, which is this TV show about blade making, and that sequence slightly annoyed me because I just thought, well, come on, that's not how you need to go through thermocycling, kind of like how long you're putting in the forge for, all that sort of stuff. That did kind of like take me out of the story a little bit. I think that's probably only going to be me and other people that watch Forged in Fire. But, apart from that, it was just kind of it's just a massive mammoth book. It's a big book, and it does really make me wonder how they're going to adapt this to the TV show. I can't imagine them being able to do this over less than, this is like 3 seasons worth of stuff in this book.
I get you.
Easily 3 seasons worth of stuff. So they're going to have to make some really big decisions about what they cut out, and I think that's probably going to upset a lot of people. And there's so much we haven't talked about. We haven't really touched on the witches. We haven't really touched on Yorick Berison that much. I mean, he plays such a massive part in certainly the first and the second book. The way that Lyra is able to forge these alliances and make friends and all this stuff. But I think we should probably make our recommendations at this point, unless there's anything else you want to cover.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. We could go on about them for forever. And I think that's why there are so many, other things of people talking about it, writing about it, all sorts. There is so much in there. But I think we've done a good cover of it. Hopefully we've done a good sales pitch on you all. I really do think you should listen to it. I think the story is good for so many different reasons. The amount of things it explores, like I say, just that idea of demons, even if you're just interested in that as reading it as a book of how would that concept play out in itself. There's so many reasons to read it. There's so many people that love it. We did a round at work in one of our meetings about what's your favorite book, and 2 people picked His Dark Materials. It's wonderful. And then equally, I think if you are considering reading it, then I think you should listen to it. I've said this before, it's the audiobook that I recommend to anyone when they say they're looking to get into audiobooks. Apart from potentially the length of it, I think it really is a good introduction to them and to what they can be. It's just fabulous. I'm so glad that there was all these different actors in it. I'm sure that one narrator would also have done a really great job, but I think it's just really, really special. For me, it's like, a TV show where you don't have to worry about the CGI budget and making any sets and costumes or anything like that, because you make all that imagery through just the words that are on the page anyway that are being read out, and through the amazing way that they are being read out. It's just magical. It's wonderful. So yes, go on, Fahad, you give your recommendation.
I would say this is highly recommended from me as well. I fully understand why Poppy fell in love with these when she was younger. Everything, the books themselves, you can't have a good audiobook without good text. And His Dark Materials Trilogy it's a stone cold classic. And I think the audiobooks elevate the material in a lot of ways. And it's an experience you really shouldn't deny yourselves. If you've got the opportunity to listen to these audiobooks, they're being re-released. And thank you again to the folks at Penguin Random House for giving us access to them. I do believe they're available for purchase.
They're already out.
They were re-released in June. I think the recommended retail price is around £16 per book. I think that's well worth it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Also, you did a post on our social medias. Follow if you aren't already, everybody.
Yeah.
About Zigzag.
Yeah.
XIGXAG.
Yeah.
And I did have a look and they are on there as well, which might work out better for you depending on how you read your audiobooks and stuff like that. Certainly worth considering. But yes, I believe that they're worth buying them. Like I say, if I didn't already just have them, then I would have bought them and then been like, oh no, I've just bought them when Penguin's already going to give us them anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like one of the comparisons I would like to make is the graphic novel adaptations that we did for Slain.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this is like a comparable product because of the production values that have been put into in terms of the extensiveness of the cast. And I mean, it's a lot longer story as well. I think for the graphic novel ones we did, I think they worked out as around £10 or £12 per book, depending on where you got it from. So for £16, this is a bargain.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So that's 2 definite thumbs up from me.
Sure.
So I think this is going to be our longest episode by quite a long way.
Yes. Yeah. Apologies to everyone that there might be a few more and stuff left in here as I race through the edit. I hope that didn't interrupt your listening too much.
Yeah, sure. And what book are we doing next? Is it The Carpet People?
No, so next we are doing True Crime Story.
Oh, True Crime Story.
Also gifted to us review copies from Penguin Random House. So we're very excited about
Yes. So we'll do that in a couple of weeks' time. And we've got some other plans for books that we're going to do. We are going to be covering the books that we said that we're going to be covering. So thank you guys. I really hope you have enjoyed the episode. Yep. And we hope you go out and let us know what you think of the His Dark Material audiobooks.
Please do, yeah. We'd love to chat about you with even more stuff we didn't talk about on like socials and stuff like that.
That's great. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.